I remember one of my last clients, I was called by her daughter and son-in-law because they weren't sure how to have the difficult conversations with her. They were like, we're getting to the end. She may have a couple of months left and we don't know how to talk about this with her. Could you do it? And then we'll come back and then you can share with us. And so they put me on FaceTime and they leave and I tell her like, well, listen, you're dying. How do you want this to go? And she's like, oh, thank God someone said it. She's like, I know I'm dying. I got like a week left. These people think I have months. Then we spent the next 2 hours just laughing about this amazing life she had.
Welcome to Voices of Esalen. I'm Sam Stern. My guest today is Darnell Lamont Walker, one of those people who has somehow managed to live several lives inside a single lifetime. He is a writer, filmmaker, children's television creator, and death doula. Some of his documentary film work explores Black Americans seeking refuge from injustice, Black mental health, and the global epidemic of sexual violence. His newest book, Never Can Say Goodbye: The Life of a Death Doula and the Art of a Peaceful End, grows out of his work supporting people and families at the end of their lives. In this conversation, Darnell and I talked about what a death doula actually does, how storytelling can become a form of legacy work, how families can begin having honest conversation long before the crisis of death arrives, and the near-death experience at age 22 that changed his life. We spoke also about laughter at the bedside, about the role of ritual in grief, about the silence many Black men inherit around vulnerability and death, and how to speak with children, plainly and tenderly, about dying. Darnell also shared why he asks people to write their own obituary, how families can tell the truth about the dead without flattening them into saints, and why his work, whether with children, the dying, or the grieving, so often comes down to finding the empty space where healing is needed and stepping into it. At age 22, you were told you should have died a month ago after doctors found 16 blood clots in your body.
Mm-hmm.
How did that near-death experience redefine your personal mission of living?
Yeah, it was at 22, we don't think we're gonna die, right? It was like, I'm just going about my life. I had a kid on the way. I was still partying with friends. I was living this life and knew out of college. And it was like, oh, and up until that point, I'd been living like there was so much time left. I wasn't going after the dreams that I had, and not in the way that I feel like I did after that knowledge, and it was, that question that we get asked, if you had only a day to live, or a week, or a month, or a year to live, what would you do? And so then I had to answer that question. It was, well, what would I do if I had just limited time? And then I had to live that way, because if I don't, this had to push me in that direction, because I see what happens when we all know we're going to go, but I know what happens when we get to the end and we didn't go after that life we wanted.
Mhm.
And so for me, it was having to face that mortality, and still, like I still have to take blood thinner medication
Mhm.
um, every day, for the rest of my life to prevent clots. And I've had many since then, even taking the medication,
Wow.
that have gone to my lungs and have, gone all from my legs,
Oh my
uh,
gosh.
and just switched over to the other leg at one point. And, living in another country at one point, and I'm like, oh, well, this is where I'm going to die. But I'm glad it's here. I remember thinking, I'm glad it's here. I'm glad it's in South Africa, where I made it over here and I'm living this life that I wanted. So if I died now, it would be inconvenient, but it would have been a beautiful life. And so now I can say that, like, if I die now, I die happy. The name of the book is Never Can Say Goodbye: The Life of a Death Doula and the Art of a Peaceful End.
Darnell, for people who don't know, what does a death doula actually do, both at the bedside and
And beyond. Yeah, we are there to support the dying person and the family. um, however that looks to them, spiritually, physically, emotionally. At the core, that's the simplest definition. But in the larger context of it, we bring ourselves to the work. And so for me, as a death doula, I do that, and doing that, I'm also there to help them tell their stories. I've seen the importance of storytelling, and I love storytelling myself. I am a writer. And so I bring myself to that, and I come in and I try to get folks to tell their own story. And a lot of times when I'm hired, that's why I'm hired, because they know this about me, and they want to leave something behind, like so it sort of becomes like a legacy project. But there's so many death doulas. There's some who focus on bedside vigils. There's some who focus on helping the family after the death with the planning and moving through grief. Some who have come from being hospice nurses
Mm.
and decided to be death doulas now, because they can get more involved with the family's life, and they use the skills that they picked up as hospice doula and hospice nurses, and the knowledge that they have to be better advocates in the healthcare system for their clients. And so we do so many things, but at the core of it all is it's that support.
At what point do you tend to be brought into the picture?
Yeah, great question. It used to be at the end. Well, yeah, right. I'd say maybe there were weeks left to days left. Now, thankfully, because of this book, and because more conversations are happening, and people are ready to have these conversations, I'm coming in at the planning part where more families and even just individuals are saying, I've seen what happens when we don't talk, when we don't plan, when death is this thing that will happen so far away, and it doesn't happen that way and things fall apart. I'd rather get this done now. So I'm being called in now when there is no threat. Seemingly these people have years left, and hopefully they have as many as they want, left. But I'm coming in so much sooner, which I love that. And I'm still getting calls for the end. One of my last clients was just a week away. One before that was maybe 3 weeks or maybe a month away, from the end. And I'm grateful for that too.
What are the emotions that you tend to grapple with? Like, I'm imagining that fear
Mhm.
is one of the major ones, but can you run me a bit through like the gamut?
One of my first questions is usually, how do you want to die? And even the thought of that, and the conversations about death in a room where this person may be just days away from death has not come up when it comes to the family. It's, if we don't talk about it, it won't happen. Or if we talk about it, it's going to happen right now, and we're not ready for that.
Mm.
And so fear plays into that in a huge way. But sometimes there is a joy or happiness or I don't want to say longing, but there's this feeling in some folks who they're just so ready. It's like, I am happy that this end is coming. I am ready to go. I've accepted it, and I'm glad that I can live these last few days the way I want. And so there's a happiness that comes with that. But then there's also, like, then regret comes in too. And so when we're at the end, we're dealing with so much regret. Not all of us, some of us, and I think we'll all get to the end with regrets, but the size of those will vary. And so I have people who are dealing with that, and so the emotions that come with, did I do what I was supposed to do? Did I do it right? Was I good enough? Or I wish I had done this and I never got around to doing this. It's this fear and worry about whether, like, what is going to happen, what is over there, because we don't know. No one's come back and told us, who completely died, and so we don't know what that is. So there's this worry and concern. that comes a lot of times, especially from the family, because and not only about the death, but about who are we going to become once our loved one dies? Who will we be to each other? How will we behave? Because we've seen what happens to families that, especially when the glue of the family dies
Mm.
and everyone just falls apart. And so there's that worry there and that concern. And then trying to find ways to get to the core of it. Like if it's fear, where does the fear come from? Sometimes it comes from, that not knowing. Sometimes it comes from being forgotten. And sometimes it comes from, I haven't gotten around to doing the things that I really wanted to do.
Mm.
I've wanted to do all, and now I'm dying and um, I'm sad about that. And the world will not have what I had to offer.
Mm.
And so when there's time before the death and I'm able to help, I hate to say fix, but fix that with folks who seemingly have time, then we get to that. It's like, well, let's get to the living then. Let's get to this life that you wanted to live. And maybe we can reduce a little bit of that worry, that fear, that concern you have.
Can you talk to me about how ritual plays a part in the death doula work that you do?
In terms of dying, like the way families have handled it, through time. I know in my family, the ritual was, well, sadly, it was broken at a generation. But with my grandmother who brought me into this work, the way she wanted things done, she wanted the bedside vigil. She wanted her body clean. She wanted her body to be on display in her living room. There was a process to this. There was this ritual that she wanted to have. It was broken. I hate to blame funeral homes, but it always comes back to these funeral homes who kind of took the bodies outside of the home and took us away from um, that beginning and that care that very familial and just intimate care that we gave families. Um, and and so now it's less that and more just it runs on a machine. But we're coming back to that. And a lot of families want to get involved in that. They want to find ways to bring in ritual because one, there's an honoring in that, and there's an honoring in the life and the death and respect in that. And so I get calls often from people who say, I want to when they die, I want to clean them. I want to have that time. But even going after the death, like creating rituals can be a way to keep us grounded. It can be a way to help with the grief even. I have clients who say, anytime I think about the person I love, I will light a candle and then I'll go for a walk. If the grief gets too heavy, I'll go and just stick my hands in the dirt in the garden and plant some seeds. And that's ritual too. It's creating these things that keep us
Mm.
and help us um, get through and move forward and whatever this transition is, whether we're transitioning to the end or transitioning to who we will become when that person is gone.
Mm.
Finding these things that really ground us can be so impactful.
Mm.
Um, but I love the thought of getting back to the beginning though, and getting back to one and finding what really works for us. Like I've been doing some work with an incredible natural burial ground here. I'm actually in Virginia right now, and I've been doing some work with them, hearing about how the families come out and even just preparing the body and preparing to bury their loved ones. Like all the ritual that goes into that is so beautiful, and it's like, oh yes, we're moving in the right direction. We're taking all that back and putting more love back into it.
I'm sure not every death is peaceful. What do you do when there is anger or unfinished business or chaos in the room?
Mm, yeah, yeah. As death doulas have to know that going in, we're not there to fix anything first. And so that will happen. That it does happen. There are some people who will get to the end and put a fight up, put up a fight the entire time. And we're there to witness and there to listen and there to be present, and let them know that that too is okay, and it's hard because uh, so much in me, especially, I want to get that good death people talk about. I want you to leave here peacefully. I want the story to be beautiful. I want your family to say it was an incredible and I was honored to be there. And they still do most of the time. But there are people like I noticed I have not personally, but I was talking to a friend recently who's a death doula, and they have a friend who was dying and within 4 months was dying within 4 months of diagnosis, and was fine seemingly before that, went in for to get some things checked out because everything was in tip-top shape, and found out it was cancer. And then 4 months later was on his deathbed and hadn't accepted it, rightfully so. It was so fast. And so up until the end, it's like, I don't want to die. And I don't want to talk about it or plan anything because I don't want this to happen. And it was okay. Well, I'm still here and I'm still present. And I don't, because this is happening and I don't want you to go alone. And so it's doing that. It's knowing you can't fix it all the time and it won't be beautiful all the time, but you can still be there and, um, help tell that story too.
Mm. Wow. What about humor? Because knowing you to some degree, I know you like to laugh and you're funny. You have
Love
a
it.
good sense of humor.
Mhm.
Have you ever experienced laughter in a room that was also holding death?
Oh, all the time. It's one of the things that it's gotten us through so often, like, I mean, just in life, period. When things get hard, we have to find the humor so often to just move from one place to another. It doesn't change in these rooms. I remember one of my last clients, I was called by her daughter and son-in-law because they weren't sure how to have the difficult conversations with her. They were like, we're getting to the end. She may have, a couple of months left, and we don't know how to talk about this with her. And could you do it? And we'll just put you on FaceTime and leave you in the room, and then we'll come back, and then you can share with us. And they do. And so they put me on FaceTime, and they leave, and I tell her like, well, listen, you're dying. How do you want this to go? And she's like, oh, thank God someone said it. She's like, I know I'm dying. I got like a week left. These people think I have months. She's like, and we want to get to it. And then we spent the next 2 hours, well, next hour just laughing about this amazing life she had, the sorry football team she followed for, for years. She's like, oh, they're so bad. And I hope I can die and just come back and watch them and maybe they'll do good, and we're laughing. And so her family comes back in and they're like, well, what's going on? And then we're able to talk, and I'm telling them, like, you could have had these conversations. She was ready to have these conversations, because once you get through the hard parts, you can get back to the fun and the joy and the laughter sometimes. Um, but it's so that even my granddad, I wasn't, I when he died, I'd known what a death doula was, and I know that the work I was doing was what a death doula does. I hadn't fully accepted it, and hadn't I wasn't doing it intentionally, but I was very much there for him. And we would just spend days in his room talking about like these kids he probably has somewhere around the world, and he's like, I need you to do the eulogy because you're the only smart one in this family. And we're talking about like how people are just dumb. And it was like the funniest times, and I'm so grateful for those because even after his death, like those are the things that get me through the laughter and that we had at the end, even though he knew it was coming.
Mm.
But you have to have the humor. I think it's important. Like, there's a young woman I follow now on Instagram, and I think she's in her early 20s, diagnosed with She has cancer and she's dying, and doesn't have much time left. But it's one of the funniest Instagram accounts that I've seen. And it's so strange for me. Like, I actually want to write about it because she's making these hilarious posts, and you see people in the comments like, "Oh, we're praying for you." And it's like, no. And I'm in the comments like, "This is the funniest shit I've ever seen in my life." And she's like, "Thank you so much," because we want to laugh. We sometimes we don't need the sad, "I'm praying for you, I'm sending you love and light." No, laugh with me. So I know it's okay to laugh too, but it's necessary.
Mm.
Hmm.
In your book, you note that you've never been called to a bedside by a black man himself, but rather by their families.
Hmm.
What are the societal barriers, do you think, that stop black men for grieving for themselves? And then how do you help them kind of break that silence?
Yeah, it was just a long stretch of time where you didn't share yourself or what was happening, your burdens or anything with anyone because everyone was going through it, for black folks. It was like we're all going through the same thing. So I don't need to share this with you because you know. From there to I need to to be the pretending to need to be the strong one, right? And this comes from generational trauma, racial trauma, how medical, medical trauma.
Mm,
Um, and so I need to be the strong one in these situations and faith because I'm the rock of the family, and if I can't show that emotion because if I do, then I will break, and and who else will hold us all together? When in reality, you're going to break anyway, and you're not avoiding it. You're just putting it off to go be alone in your grief
mm,
when you could do this with everyone else. And so it's done so much damage. Like even my dad won't talk about it. He will not have conversations about death whatsoever. Um, and I know what it does though. Like I've seen how hurt he gets when we just had a cousin die from pancreatic cancer, and he's like, I don't know if I can go to the hospital and see him. And this is, like they were close. His best friend died of the same thing, both pancreatic cancer.
mm,
And he's like, I don't, I don't go to the hospital. And I think it's this thing of, well, if I fall apart, no one will be able to put me back together. And you just don't know what's on the other side of that. Like who can you trust to do it after decades of pretending that you don't break at all?
mm,
And now I'll be seen as weak. And so even so, you know, I've been at the bedside of black men, but I was never called by them. It was always by the family or the doctor or the nursing team, one of my last clients. But I feel like if he was able to, one of my last clients, he was 21. And I do see a difference between the those who are, slightly younger than me and the guys who are my dad's generation. If my last client who was 21 was able to talk and able to communicate, I feel he would have called me in.
mm.
Like these young kids are ready to have these conversations. They don't need to put up that facade of strength and to because we realize that real courage is actually letting yourself be vulnerable and letting yourself fall apart and trusting that someone can put you back together.
Just curious about the personal toll of this work on you. What does this work do to your nervous system? And how do you metabolize sitting with death?
Yeah, mostly this work is good for me. It fills me up. It recharges me, even when it's hard, even like there's grief with every client I get. I think about them often. Even when we only spent, an hour on a Zoom call, on a FaceTime, and that's our only time we communicate. Like I still think about her and the things she wanted and the life she lived. But I also know that she wasn't alone. She was able to have that conversation with her kids that they really needed to have and wanted to have. And I was able to tell, and I'm able to carry on and continue on telling parts of her story. And so that fills me up because that's a big part of why I do this work. But there are the 21-year-olds and even older folks, but especially that story really sticks with me because he was because I have a kid who's 21, and to know that this kid was in the hospital alone, no, his family wasn't coming. He'd known he was dying for months, and they knew he was dying for months. And it was, why are you alone? And when I got there, he could only see out of one eye, couldn't speak, couldn't hear, he could only hear out of one ear, and was paralyzed. I'm just sitting there thinking, like, this could be my kid. And so that's the hard part. That stays with me. And then knowing when the family does come around, they kept him alive. Like he had been slipping out, and they would tell the doctors, like, no, bring him back while they figure out who's going to get these cell phones and PlayStation that are in this little tub that he had. His entire life fit into this little plastic bedpan. So he was kept alive for an extra week while they figured it out. And so that stays with me, and that's the hard part. But I get to move forward and use that story to talk to other families and say, do not be these people.
Yeah.
Have these conversations long before if you need to talk about who's getting what, do it now before there's a crisis or threat of anything. I've talked to families like, well, if this happened to your kid, what would you do? Especially when there's some sort of strain on the family. Some of it, all of it stays with me, some in great ways, some in awful ways. I was there for a friend who was 39, and he never got to live the life that he wanted. And he said that from his deathbed. I asked him, if he did what he wanted to do, and he's like, no, I never got around to it because I was living my life for someone else.
Mm.
And he's like, but don't let my nephews do that. And
Mm.
so it's, oh, I can carry this to them and to everyone else. And so that stays with me, knowing he didn't get to do it, but knowing that his story will help other people do.
Wow.
Yeah.
You tell the story in your book of a couple, Miles and Rashad, where Miles, who wanted to playfully slap his partner for feeling guilty about not being able to stop the cancer.
Yeah.
So how do you help caregivers? Because I imagine this is pretty common. How do you help caregivers release that kind of God complex, that belief that they should have been able to
Yeah.
override a terminal diagnosis?
Yeah, it's tough. I highly recommend grief counseling in those cases and just regular counseling. I think we should all, for whatever we should all be seeing someone, even if it's just for tune-ups once a year. You can convince yourself, like, is there something I could have done? It's like, I could have done more. And I said, well, do you feel that you are bigger than cancer? Do you feel like you can cure it? And he's like, no. Well, why do you think you could have done something? And having those conversations and just breaking it all the way down to realizing that guilt is such a tricky thing where it convinces us that we could have done superhuman things to save someone or to change the outcome. When in reality, we could. You might find this one little thing that's like, well, maybe you could have recommended green juice. Give yourself the time, give yourself the grace to know those thoughts, but stay in contact and communication with folks who can help ground you and hold that space without judgment. As friends, I think we can absolutely help ground people by just saying, no, there's nothing you can do. There was nothing you could do. Like, you loved him, as like your love is probably what kept him alive. But grief counseling, therapy is beautiful. Journaling is beautiful because, again, it's good to see where we were, to be able to look back on where we were at some point, because this may happen again, and to give yourself a blueprint for this work.
Mm. Darnell, you write for children's educational TV, so I know you have a deep respect for children and you think a lot about clear communication with children. So I'm curious if in this realm, if your job has helped you understand how to speak with kids about death, and if so, how does one do that?
Yeah, it's changed how I speak to kids about death. I just came up like, oh, well, we just have to be very straightforward. Mainly because I was a kid whose mom and whose grandmother talked to about death. Don't flower the language, just tell them what it is, give them space to ask the questions that they want to ask. Kids are curious. Kids want to know. If they're afraid of it, it's because we've made them afraid of it. It's easy to have these conversations with kids. They'll ask a question, run off, play, come back. Oh, well, does that mean I won't see him again? Yes. And it may get sad for a while. And I think a lot of times parents are so afraid of getting it wrong that it makes them afraid in general of the conversation. But I think if we can just be open to one, getting it wrong and finding out the answer together, like, I don't know, but let's go find that. We all have cell phones now, and we all have access to the internet somewhere. Let's find an answer together. But what's changed for me is being with so many people at the end and listening to the things that they regret or the way their lives have gone, and now using them to create content for kids, to create kids that won't turn into these folks I'm helping now at the end of their life. There are people they never forgave, stories they never got a chance to write, music didn't get to make. And so when I create for kids, I want to create content that tells them in a way, like, live fully, like, do these things you've always wanted to do now. you know, be curious, have these conversations. This is how we forgive friends. This is how we do this work. So when they get to a point, it's like, oh no, I have all this, teaching radical empathy to children. There was a stretch of time, and I think we may still be in it. We were creating better children, and especially creating better boys was a big theme in cartoons over the last few years. And so doing that, it's like, yeah, because I can now create those men who grow up and won't say, oh, I have to be the strong one for the family. It's changed how I approach writing these episodes, writing these premises and these scripts, and even pitching shows. I finally, a studio said yes to letting me write an episode about death. I've been trying to do it for years. I finally turned in the last script a couple weeks ago, and it's like, yes, okay, right on. And now, and not only for kids, but hopefully the parents are watching it with the kids and can also find a way into the conversation about how to, their grandma died. I don't know how to tell them. It's like, just tell them, be straightforward. Tell them grandma died. This is what it means. Do you have any questions? Do you want to go to the funeral? Or if grandma's dying, like, do I let them go and see her in the hospital? Kids need closure too.
There's a part in your book about writing your own obituary every
Mhm.
year. Can you talk to me about how owning your narrative in a certain way can affect how you hold the priorities of your current life?
It's so important. Like, there's even a part of my workshop at Esalen, write their life story in 3 sentences. It's and and I actually did it just 2 days ago at a workshop here, and people are like, "Oh my God!" And someone says, "Oh, are we writing about the life we want for ourselves now?" I said, "No, you write where you've come from." And so then they do it, and then by doing that, you can see if you're headed toward the life you want now, or if you're in the life you want now, and if not, there you know that there's still breath in your body, which means there's still time and room to change that. And that's why I love doing it. I love updating that. Love helping other people get that. There's that one story about Albert Nobel, I think, where he woke up one morning and was reading the newspaper and saw his obituary had been posted. And he's like, wait, what? And they called him the father of death, because he was a pioneer in, like, TNT and dynamite, and he's like, no. And that's not how I want to be remembered. And now we only know him as the creator of the Nobel Peace Prize and the Nobel Prize, you know, and it's like, he's like, I need to change that.
Some families feel pressured not to speak ill of the dead, even if the person was kind of difficult.
Mhm.
How can you help families experiencing the loss and the grief also feel comfortable around speaking that gritty, uncomfortable truth?
Yeah, it's, you know, it's not our burden to carry. We have to carry the truth for us. We know what's true to us. We have to be able to say those things. Keeping those in only damages us, you know, and even the person, they had an option to live a full life, and so do we. And part of living that full life is being honest and, you know, being honest in those stories. Even in storytelling, I tell people, you know, if when you're writing, so many people are so afraid to tell their stories. Should I change my name? Should I change their name? Like, no, if they wanted to be written about better, they would have behaved better, you know? And so we don't have to carry that for them, and we shouldn't. And if they're still alive, we get to help them make peace with that too. I think we all deserve to be full when we live and when we die. Part of that comes in showing up to the funeral even and telling those full stories. I remember one of the stories in the book, Leon was a kid I met at Burning Man, and for the most part was this annoying guy who gets drunk and is loud and abrasive. But I liked him, and it was a lot of fun for me because I recognized that and I knew people like that, and I didn't know he was going to die that day, like just maybe 45 minutes after I met him. But you know, when I spoke with his mom after, it was like, it's important for me to tell you how I experienced your son.
Yeah.
He was all of these things. You know, he was loud and he was drunk and he was saying some crazy things to people, but he also helped this guy change out of his wet clothes, and he was so kind and just a beautiful person to him in that moment. So he was all of these things, and and she's like, yes, that's him, you
Mm.
know, because then we get to these funerals and people are like, oh, he was such an angel, and then there are people looking like, are we talking about the same person? You know, I remember going to a funeral of a guy who died in college. And, you know, it was like a memorial service on campus, and we were there, and people were just saying these beautiful things about him. No, you know, like well, and so then I felt too shut down. I couldn't say anything. It was like, I won't speak about it.
Mm.
And so even being able to speak ill of the dead and just tell your truth. It doesn't have to be bad. You know, I had a situation recently where people were doing this about a father. They were telling these amazing stories about these kids' dad. And they were like, that's not how I experienced him. And so then they felt like they couldn't say anything about their dad. And they didn't because everyone else was telling lies or partial lies. Um,
Mm.
and so it takes away that safe space for people when we lie and we aren't honest. So yeah, speak ill, speak your truth. I'm sort of this bridge where people can go from one place to this other place, whether that's the last place or just moving toward healing, joy, empathy, or growth in childhood, whatever that is, getting ready for preschool even. I find these gaps and say, oh, I can, what I have can fill that. I always said the purpose of life is to find an empty space and fill it. And I think that's what it is. We see people
Mm.
are grieving heavily alone, and it was, oh, this is what's needed. Now I have to do that. Like I can't just sit back and watch this happen when I have the tools to fix it.
Mm.
And so I think that's what it is. I think I just find the gap and then fill that.
Darnell Lamont Walker, your book is Never Can Say Goodbye: The Life of a Death Doula and the Art of a Peaceful End. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciated hearing you and learning from you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a great time talking with you.
Thank you for listening to Voices of Esalen. This show is produced in conjunction with Shira Levine. Our theme song is by Nico Holloman. I advocate for radical transparency in the use of AI, and such, I must say that today's introduction was written with the assistance of a large language model. If you ever want to write me an email, I'm accepting all correspondence. Just write to sam.stern@esalen.org. We'll see you next time.